People. Allah, Allah, Allah. Let me tell you something, an incident between two legends. Ibn Rushd, on one hand, Abul Walid ibn Rushd, the great Muslim philosopher, jurist, the judge of his time, the philosopher of his era, the man who they call the commentator when it comes to Aristotle. He brought back to life, he resuscitated the philosophical works of Aristotle and became the conduit that served them onto Europe, aiding it from its dark ages to its renaissance. Ibn Rushd, the man who stood face to face, metaphorically speaking, against Imam Ghazali when Imam Ghazali had unleashed an attack on philosophy. And you have to remember, philosophy in that day and age included science as well. So science is the study of nature and our world and observations. And so this, in that day and age, hikmah was that. Hikmah was the study of nature, the study of plants, botany, the study of the cosmos, the study of the self. Especially these kind of things put together, they did refer to them as hikmah, and obviously also philosophy as well. But as sciences continue to mature through time, they tend to kind of branch off and become specialist areas. So in his day and age, he responded to Ghazali's Tahafut al-Falasifa with his Tahafut al-Tahafut. So Tahafut al-Falasifa was the incoherence of the philosophers, and he replied with his Tahafut al-Tahafut, the incoherence of the incoherent. Amazing. A legend, somebody who, if you read his work on, in fact, I have a video clip on Averroes, if you check it out on YouTube. I read through his commentary on Plato's Republic, where he speaks about Andalus in his day and age. And we're going back almost 900 years. Yeah. Where he speaks about, it's a shame that women, he says, are 50% of our society, yet people they don't create opportunities for them to prosper in this and this and this. If you read those extracts, you would think that's a contemporary writer. And yet it was written almost 900 years ago in Muslim Spain. So this is the man, the myth, the legend, Ibn Rushd, the voice of reason, Allah. And in his day and age, you also had, much junior to him, Muhyiddin Ibn Araby, Al-Kibrit Al-Ahmar, or Sheikh Al-Akbar. You had the man, the legend of mystical experience, the man who had tread the path of consciousness. And it's amazing what they call al-kashf, that kind of like removing the veil of the dimensions. And so you have these two huge monumental figures, and they meet. So what's interesting is Ibn Rushd for long had, because he championed the voice of reason, he was against many of the Sufis, and he was against many of the theologians, and against because he felt that they were inaccurate in some of their things, but he was never against the path of consciousness. And even if it wasn't one that he maybe championed, and this mystical experience, So when he meets Ibn Arabi, he's the judge, Ibn Rushd is, and he's wanted to meet Ibn Arabi. He's heard about him. He says that there's this young man who has had these great mystical experiences, and he has treaded this path of consciousness and with just great discoveries. So Ibn Rushd was so intrigued, and he wanted to meet him for a considerable amount of time. So and he knew Ibn Arabi's father. Ibn Arabi's father was almost like a student to Ibn Rushd. And so he told him, "You have to send your son to me. I need to meet him." And this had gone on for a while. So on this one occasion, his father, Ibn Arabi, sends Ibn Arabi to him. So Ibn Arabi approaches, and these two legends meet. And when he meets him, you see, it's as though the conversation had already taken place. And remember what I said about the souls are entwined, they are connected. When Ibn Rushd met him, he asked him straight away. He just said to him, he just looked at him and said, "Is it or no?" And you think, what? What is? He just looked at him as yes or no. And Ibn Arabi looked straight at him and he says yes. And Ibn Rushd lights up. He lights up. Allah. This, you can see the radiance, the glow. And then Ibn Arabi says, La, no. And Ibn Rushd, he becomes tense. You see this kind of going into a remote, pensive distraction almost. And then Ibn Arabi follows it by saying, وَبَيْنَهُمَا تَطِيحُ الْأَرْوَاحِ. He said, and between them, the souls are annihilated. Allah, Allah, Allah. Na'am, that na'am, la, وَبَيْنَهُمَا تَطِيرُ الْأَرْوَاحِ. That yes, no, and between them, the souls are annihilated. What on earth? And you see, it is this conversation, and this is it. And then he goes. And Ibn Rushd says to him, he says, do come back. And before he actually goes, Ibn Rushd says to him, see, because when he says the souls are annihilated, it once again restores hope, and I'll explain why in just a moment. And then Ibn Rushd says, هذه حالة أثبتناها. He says, this condition, this state, we have affirmed it. وما رأينا لها أربابا. It's just we hadn't seen a people who had qualified it yet. And he says, فالحمد لله الذي أنا في زمان فيه واحد من أربابها. He says, all praise be to Allah that I'm in an era where one of its people, a person of that path, is in it. But not just any person, arbab, that from the legends, the al-fatihin, those who open maghaliq abwabiha, who open the locks of the doors of this path. Walhamdulillahi alladhi haddani bi ru'yati, khassani bi ru'yati. And all praise be to Allah who allowed me to see such a person. And he tells him that do come back. And it's said that Ibn Arabi goes, he's a very young man at the time, maybe in his very late teens, possibly maybe approaching 20 or in his late teens at the at the most. He's not he's very young, whereas Ibn Rushd is very senior at that time. And Ibn Arabi says, I was meant to meet him. I had made another appointment to meet him, and he says, I had a dream. And he says, in the dream I was there and Ibn Rushd was there, the Don. And Ibn Rushd is one of the great Maliki legends, by the way. He says he was there. And he says, and between us all of a sudden was a very faint, it was slightly opaque veil, very thin, but a veil. He says, I could see him, but for some reason he couldn't see me anymore. And then he awoke. And he says that I felt that this dream was a sign that maybe Ibn Rushd will not see eye to eye on this matter about this path of consciousness. So maybe it's better not to get into that altercation with him. So he says, even though I had a meeting, an appointment to see him, I avoided it. And he says, and then I was only reunited with him when his body was brought to Marrakesh to be buried. And it's just a mind-blowing encounter of two legendary symbols of two paths. This path of pure rational experience and pure conscious experience, and how these paths are then entwined. And Ibn Rushd saying, even though he was harsh against some of the other people, he said that this is a state that we have affirmed, that he said that I knew it, I just hadn't met the right people. And in his people have really tried to, what was it that he meant with his answer, Ibn Arabi? So look at this. So the backdrop to what he was saying, and people may disagree over it, was Ibn Rushd had in his mind the question about reason. Can reason, the path of reason, what you have experienced, does it affirm that? Like, are we may be taking different routes, but is it, we're both, it's right, isn't it? Does it, like your kashf, the veil being removed, does it not just affirm this path of pure reason? This was the question in the mind of Ibn Rushd. And when he met Ibn Arabi replied, "Naam, yes it is." And Ibn Rushd became so elated, ecstatic with joy, because this was a man who'd spent his life fighting the corner of the voice of reason. And then Ibn Arabi said, "La." And it took him to a somber, depressive almost state, that no. But then he followed it with this caveat that وَبَيْنَهُمَا تَطِيرُ الْأَرْوَاحِ, and between them the souls must encounter an ego death. Allah, Allah, Allah. Now, you can take from that what you may, but one thing I understand is that in the search of divine truth, there is something known as ego death, the annihilation of the ego, al-fana fillah, this concept of annihilating the self, fillah. And it is weird. It is not against the voice of reason. But yet, it is a path that is very experiential. And that's why his la, the na'am being yes, it is not against the voice of reason. It only affirms reason. But the no being that, but it is something that it must be tasted. I can't tell you what an apple tastes like. I can just say it's sweet or it's bitter or sour, or I can try to give some likeness, but you see, it's experiential. But to experience it, the ego must taste to death.